Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Liss, and I'm the Vice President, Research and Innovation at Ryerson University. It is my pleasure to be able to tell you about the upcoming session on the future of work for inclusive innovation, put on by the Future Skills Center, which we are proud to host at Ryerson, and introduce our moderator and panelist. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which the university resides and from where I'm participating in today's session. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is the treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. The land acknowledgement reminds us of the important work of the reconciliation that is ongoing and the need to address historic wrongs. It also captures our need to chart a meaningful path forward in a collaborative manner. So welcome. The Future Skills Center, or FSC, is an action research center focused on innovating and testing what works in skills development for whom and in what context to help prepare Canadians to navigate our rapidly changing global economy and labor markets. FSC is funded by the Government of Canada's Future Skills Program. And FSC is a consortium that includes our partners at Conference Board of Canada, Blueprint ADE, while our Ryerson colleagues at Diversity Institute and Magnet play a very key integral part of delivering FSC's mandate. At the heart of FSC's work is a commitment to supporting Canadians who have been historically excluded and disadvantaged in training and labor market opportunities. We want to ensure that no Canadian is left behind. That means both supporting individuals to gain skills that they need to be resilient and prosper, and also addressing systemic barriers and working with employers to ensure that pathways into jobs and to advancement are inclusive. Innovation drives all sorts of economic activity and growth across all sectors, whether it's just developing new processes, products, or technologies, or the adoption and use of those processes, products, or technologies. Canada needs an inclusive innovation mindset, policies, and skills and talent to prosper. I am excited that today we will hear of important work and perspectives on how we're doing and how to do better. And it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce Nabila Stabalan, Executive Vice President, People and Corporate Affairs, Walmart Canada, who will moderate this engaging discussion. Nabila is an internationally recognized leader and visionary in her current role. Nabila leads human resources and corporate affairs for one of Canada's largest employers with over 100,000 associates and more than 400 stores nationally. And her career includes nearly 20 years of leadership and business development experience with three of the world's most recognized brands, Walmart, IKEA, Starbucks Coffee in the US, Canada, and Europe. Nabila was previously head of digital transformation, INGA, leading IKEA's digital and retail transformation globally across 41 countries. Nabila is especially passionate about enterprise-wide transformations, the future of work, change management, diversity and inclusion, and organization. And I have the distinct pleasure of serving with her on the Future Skills Center Advisory Board. Over to the distinguished panelists she will introduce.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that introduction and for Ryerson for being part of this really important conversation. We know the innovation economy is growing 3 to 6 times faster than the rest of industries, and the innovation economy has a critical role to play in addressing lots of the challenges that we face and requires next level ingenuity and innovation. But we also know that the innovation economy is fueled by talent, and to meet this challenge, we need to have future ready and an inclusive workforce, as Stephen mentioned. We also know that by default, the innovation economy isn't necessarily inclusive. And so how we design innovation to be inclusive and how we meet this challenge is one of our biggest challenges that we need to solve. So I'm really excited to have this be part of this conversation and moderate this discussion with such thought leaders and amazing panelists. I'd love to invite them all to the screen and to briefly introduce themselves. Nadine, would start with you.
Black Business and Professional Association, an organization that's been around for 40 years to address equity and create economic opportunities for Black entrepreneurs. I'm also the CEO of Brandy Q Agency, a strategic marketing and communications firm that looks through advertising campaigns through a cultural lens. I'm really thrilled to be here. I thank Future Skills, the Ryerson Diversity Institute, for having me here. Thank you.
For joining us. Rashmi, we'll go to you next.
Thank you, Nabila. Rashmi Hashem, Director of the Accelerated Cybersecurity Training Program at the Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst at Ryerson University. The mandate that we have is to increase representation of traditionally individuals who've been traditionally marginalized in a career in cybersecurity. So our program is all about reducing the barriers of entry and increasing opportunities and pathways into a career into cyber. So looking forward to having this conversation. Thank you to Future Skills and the Diversity Institute for this opportunity.
Such an important work, and we're excited to hear the amazing work that you guys are doing. You.
Hi, great to be here. And my name is Wendy Sucure. I'm the academic research lead with the Future Skills Center. I lead the Diversity Institute, and I'm a professor of entrepreneurship and strategy in the Ted Rogers School of Management. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Wendy. And last but not least, Natalie, if you could please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Shearer. I'm the manager of Future Skills Partnerships for Mohawk College. I work with our City School by Mohawk team, and I'm sure I'll have the chance to talk more about City School by Mohawk during our panel today, but we're really focused on breaking down barriers to education and employment through the college system for underrepresented folks. And I'm really pleased to be working with FSC on a project, and also through FSC partnering with colleges across Canada to implement our model of accessible education across the country. So thank you for having me, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. As you can see, we have not only thought leaders, activists, advocates, but people that are really leading some ground inclusive innovation. Before we get started and hearing from our panelists, we actually want to ask the question, what is inclusive innovation? So we've got a Mentimeter for our audience. We'd love to get that Mentimeter up on the screen and ask you, when you think of innovation, what words come to mind? So we should see the Mentimeter come up shortly, and then we'll take a few minutes just to get response from the audience on what comes to mind when you think of inclusive innovation. Not sure if the Mentimeter is up yet. There we go. So you should see the code on the top, and just put that code into menti.com and let us know when you think of inclusive innovation, what words come to mind. All right, I think while we wait for the audience participation, I think we can get started. Nadine, I'd love to ask you the first question. What is inclusive innovation to you, and why does it matter?
Inclusive innovation is very much long overdue, decades late, or even much more than that. When there are doors for everyone to participate in their economy, in their community, that's inclusive innovation. And that description is opposite for the Black community's experience. We, and including myself, I include myself in this, have been excluded at every step. We can't get loans, we can't get capital, and there's an automatic bias right from the outset. I always say that the biggest challenges that Black businesses have is that the owners are Black, because the moment we walk into a space, you see that, and something happens, that bias or that unconscious bias happens. And, so when you try to run a business with that facing you, when someone's excluded for so long, the road to equity is really quite very long and difficult. Wendy's research bears out that Black and women-owned ventures are less likely to receive financial investments, government contracts, or resources compared to white businesses. And, these reasons are, structural impediments, including systemic racism, client selection criteria, lack of gender and race sensitive programming and networks, and, toxic organizational cultures, also limited representation of diversity on decision-making boards. So such influences impede Black business owners and suggest the need for remedies to address systemic barriers rather than fixing entrepreneurs like us, as Wendy has pointed out.
Absolutely. Again, inclusive innovation is innovation that includes everyone and addresses those systemic barriers. Thank you so much for that. I'd love to hear from the other panelists. Rashmi, would you like to give your thoughts on what is inclusive innovation and why does it matter?
Yes, I just want to just a little bit on what Nadine just said. Nadine, I lived that had a robust business, needed a business loan, walked in to a business that I've been banking in for many years, and I was promptly told that I should bring my husband in to co-sign. And I asked if why was that the case? My business, my name, right? So totally to your point, having lived through that. And Wendy's research is going to knock down those walls and make it easier for other business owners to walk in, right, and receive the loan that we need to help grow. To me, inclusive innovation is, obviously it's the inclusive part of our inborn traits of age, gender, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, and all of that. But there's a bit more to that, right? There's the inclusivity of our lived experiences as well. And being able to honor those lived experiences, such as our education experience, our industry background, our career paths, foreign work experience, experiences where others have learned how to appreciate cultural differences. And when all of those lived experiences are brought in and fully appreciated in the workplace, I really think, and we listen and we truly listen to what that inclusivity is, and we encourage those perspectives of those lived experiences. That's when innovation happens. The ability to reiterate on a problem, and the ability to reiterate quickly. And so I don't like the word fail. I always believe you reiterate. But it's through those unique perspectives that we can innovate as a society. We can innovate solutioning. And in cybersecurity, we're constantly having to bring in unique perspectives because the problems that are coming at us are so diverse and they're created by diverse people. So in the space of cyber, we need the diversity of those lived experiences because it changes the way somebody will view the problem. So and I will happily share stories with you as we discuss this, but I'll just say this: the individual who is a chef and has gone through our training program and now works at a very large telecommunications company, a chef, right, changes the perspective of viewing the problem from a different way. And she brings a unique perspective that her colleagues now at this company rely on her to be able to look at the data because of her lived experiences around ingredients, recipes, and systems that she followed as a chef. And now she's able to translate that and decode that into her experience in a career in cybersecurity. That is innovation. That is inclusivity from my perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your own personal example as well and the example of that chef. Natalie, I'll go next to you. What is inclusive innovation from your perspective and why does it matter?
Thank you. I think I just want to acknowledge some really great points from Nadine and Rashmi. And it makes me reflect on the role of our post-secondary institutions in inclusive innovation. And starting before the workplace, right? There is at Mohawk, and what we've recognized is there is a significant barrier for a number of populations in our communities to accessing post-secondary education. And those are often real barriers, and often those are perceived barriers. Things like, I've never been on a college campus before. I don't have family members who have, participated in post-secondary. Why would I belong there? And so the role that we've taken, and I think that's really important, is reflecting on what we are doing as a college system or as an institution that's closing those doors to people, and finding new and innovative ways to open those doors and bring those perspectives into our classrooms. And so with City School by Mohawk, we do that by embedding our work in communities and in community spaces. And it's been, a journey of a number of years for us here at Mohawk, but it's really been a change for the whole college, not just, our access department, in bringing in perspectives that, normally are excluded from the college system. And I loved, Rashmi, your example of having a chef and the unique perspective that they might bring in. When we're opening our doors to folks who have that diverse experience, who maybe didn't finish high school because of a number of other circumstances, our learning experiences are so much more enriched and so, lead to such strong outcomes for our learners. And so I really think inclusive innovation is about reflecting on why our systems aren't working and why folks aren't showing up at our door, and then looking at what can we change and how can we make that better, and how can we serve our whole community as an institution.
Thank you, Natalie. I love that description of richness. Wendy, would you like to build or add anything to what's been said so far?
Sure. It's, one of the fundamental issues with innovation is, as people have mentioned, taking a systems approach. So we really have to start with our understanding what innovation is. Too often, innovation is equated with technology and IP and patents. And of course, technologically driven innovation, absolutely critical. Adoption of new technology has transformed business even during COVID. But innovation is about new products, new services, new approaches. It's not just about technology. So one of the fundamental issues we have to grapple with is if you make innovation synonymous with technology, you automatically exclude women who are underrepresented in the tech sector, engineering and computer science. You eliminate Black people, you eliminate Indigenous people. It's to start with a broader understanding of what innovation is, and it really applies across sectors into social as well as economic growth. And then you have to unpack, as Nadine and others mentioned, policies, programs, who has access, who doesn't. Because if you focus on technology, it means all the money goes to tech firms. Nadine showed, for example, during COVID, that Black businesses were twice as hard hit by COVID and half as likely to have access to relief programs. And COVID really, I think, highlighted kinds of inequalities. We have to think about the stereotypes of what an entrepreneur is. We know of cases where VCs have missed opportunities, like pantyhose that doesn't run because they didn't have that diversity of thought to understand the huge market that represented. You have to look at educational institutions. You have to look at how incubators and accelerators and other programs are run. Like one of the funnest, most fun incubators that we work with is Foodpreneur, focuses on food innovation specifically. And then you really have to grapple with some of the points about individuals' perceptions of what they can do, what they're capable of doing, and of course, fundamentally, skills.
Amazing. And I at Walmart Canada, we consider ourselves an innovation company, but we are, not a tech company, right, so to speak. So I love that expanded definition of what is innovation and what is the innovation economy. Such an important factor in our conversation of how to design for inclusive innovation. And also loved, I think, again, the stereotypes, right? What people can believe is even within their scope of potential. And Natalie, you talked about that as well in the secondary education system. Wendy, I'd love to stay with you and just understand, what mistakes have we made in this effort so far? And what are we currently not thinking about when it comes to inclusive innovation? What have we missed?
Thank you so much for the question. I mean, I've worked in the tech sector since before many people on the call were born. And I've worked on women in technology for more than 30 years. We have fewer women in computer science today and only marginally more in engineering because in spite of all the good, in spite of all the posters and summer camps, etc., we didn't focus on where the levers were to drive change. That's why I love, for example, Cybersecurity Catalyst and ADAPT and some of the programs that FSC is funding, because they're not just focusing on trying to get more women or more Black people into traditional pathways into, for example, tech, but they're looking at alternative pathways, taking a cook and turning them into a cybersecurity expert. So really thinking innovatively about how we design systems and programs is key. I have to give a shout out to Walmart because, you know, in my mind, lots of organizations have posters and, you know, statements and join this code or that code. Walmart puts its money where its mouth is. You know, it was an early adopter of social procurement, making space on shelves in stores for diverse entrepreneurs. Those sorts of measures that really use levers to drive change, I think are critically important. It's you know, there are no easy solutions to complex problems. So we have to understand it's a multi-layered issue. But I'm personally very supportive of, you know, the women entrepreneurship strategy, the Black entrepreneurship strategy, targeting Indigenous entrepreneurs. And, however, we need to also focus on eroding the barriers in the mainstream economic development, innovation, and research paths, because the money that is labeled women, Black, Indigenous is a pittance compared to the overall money in the system. And that, for me, is fundamental to inclusive innovation.
Amazing. And I love that kind of dual track that you described, right? You know, both supporting and rethinking how we think about skills development and, you know, reimagining that skills development for the innovation economy, and at the same time eroding the systems barriers that exist. I think that's a great example of the journey ahead. I'd love to invite the other panelists either to build or comment on this question. You know, what are we not thinking about, or anything else that you would like to add to this?
I'd love to jump into just building on what Wendy said. And I think, you know, some of the things that we haven't looked at is intentionality, and intentionally looking at inclusivity. It becomes a program, but inclusivity, when it's designed into the fabric at the very beginning, and you look at why is inclusivity important. So I'm just going to speak from the cyber side. We looked at, you know, the cybersecurity industry as a whole, and we said there's 1.5 million jobs open worldwide. Okay, we know that means there is a gap. We want to fill the gap. And then the more digging you do, and you start to see, okay, only 25% of women are represented in the entire cyber ecosystem. Do more digging, and then when you look at the representation of Black, Indigenous, and person of color, we're back, it's 25% again. So you go, okay, there's an intentionality behind designing a program and saying intentionally, we want to increase representation of women, of new Canadians, of persons who've been displaced from current work employment, or they are underemployed, which traditionally happen to be our Black, Indigenous, and person of color communities. And now intentionally designing a program that lowers the barriers of entry. So we have to create pathways, right, that lower the barriers of entry, that make it welcoming, where communities can see themselves reflected, not just in a program, but at the end goal in industry, where industry is saying, we need diversity. We need you because we are struggling against this insurmountable attacks, insurmountable challenges that threaten our communities. And I think it's linking the purpose of that end goal back to what is meaningful to the individuals that we want to see being represented and increasing the representation. So identifying purpose it is so important to bring individuals in to an intentionally designed program as well. It's not just for the sake of it. So intentionality for us is around the purpose of defending our communities, defending our schools, defending our hospitals, defending our governments, defending our commerce, defending our way of life is such a strong call to purpose within many of these communities. So when you build in intentionality in the actual design and you take it all the way to employment and you work with employers on that intentionality, it becomes this wonderful ecosystem that gets developed. And through Future Skills Center, we're really excited that we've collaborated to develop the Cybersecurity Talent Transformation Initiative that is going to research and study the impact of communities that are now coming through our program and how are employers receiving them and what are employers doing to maintain and ensure that there's inclusivity of problem solving of everybody's voice. But it's the continuum that we all need to be part of. And I think it's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge that we need to become a model that other areas outside of cyber, the non-tech industries, can also look at us as a model of being able to replicate.
I think it's the Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst is such an amazing example of challenging the stereotypes in the tech industry of what is possible. And I think to Wendy's point earlier, giving people the belief that they can achieve these types of roles and opportunities. Because often I think this is also what's changed, and I think a good conversation is happening around talent mobility and talent development, that it's no longer just upward mobility or lattice, right? There has to be these alternate pathways, as you mentioned, Wendy, and I think Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst is a great example of that. Nadine, I thought I saw you want to jump in here.
Yes, I did. I just really liked what she had to say about lowering the bars to entry and looking at alternative pathways. And to Wendy's point, really looking at what innovation is. We have a society in which a major part of it, the Black community, is completely excluded. Any society that disregards a significant portion of its citizens is not a just and diverse society. And, it's a profound mistake, really, which can't be changed without recognizing the problem and then acting on it proactively and vigorously, which we have done in many ways this year. But what compounds this mistake, not just in Canada, in the United States as well, and everywhere else in the world, is that there are Black people that are very innovative. And when I think about my daughter, my daughter's 26, and she created a product during COVID for children. So she has a daughter, and she recognized that something about the cognitive development when the kids are 2 years old. She created these tummy time mats. And I was thinking that, Black women are innovative because we have to be innovative because, we don't have necessarily a nanny who's going to take care of the child to manage the tummy time. So we have to figure out very quickly what that's going to look like. And so when we're not including innovation in our model, we're missing out, and including a diverse gender and other communities in innovation, we're really missing out, because I truly feel that the world's solution, especially with innovation, is going to come from the underserved population, because we have to be critical thinkers in terms of solutions.
Absolutely, love it. Thank you for your daughter. Natalie, I want to come to you and just ask, what skills, challenges, or issues is your organization trying to address in this skills gap and this development for inclusive innovation?
So we spoke a little bit about City School in general, and what we do at Mohawk College through our City School by Mohawk initiative is really look at the ways that we can, and I loved the phrase that Wendy used earlier, erode those barriers that equity-seeking groups are facing in accessing post-secondary, and then the benefits that come after post-secondary, whether that's further education or employment. And so our Material Handling 4.0 program is a new approach that we're taking to bridging that skills gap between, I haven't accessed post-secondary yet, and I am working and contributing to the workforce in a fulfilling and sustainable way. So we're looking specifically at the logistics sector, and we've developed some programming that really focuses on the recognition and translation and development of 21st century skills and the skills that folks need to be successful in long-term employment. And so leveraging a few tools that we have in our toolkit for that, micro-credentials, which we're exploring as a really innovative way to recognize the skills that people come in with and the skills that people develop during their time with us in a way that an employer can really, really connect with and really recognize as, you know, this person has this skill coming in and is going to be able to apply it to my workplace. We've done a lot of work with employers in the sector on understanding what they're looking for and what makes a employee who can be really successful in a role. And so there's been a lot of work on, you know, what do we need to do to make sure that folks are leaving our program to sustainable jobs, to jobs that pay a living wage, to jobs that they can grow and develop in long term. We're using a model from the American Association of Colleges and Universities called the Value Rubrics. And they really look at recognizing skills that are demonstrated in context. So this is a set of rubrics that can be taken and applied to any context, any kind of in-class work or out-of-class work, and help the instructor to actually identify when a student is demonstrating a skill and recognizing that demonstration. And it isn't specific to a specific assignment. It's really about recognizing what a student is bringing into the classroom and what that can look like in the workforce. And then moving students into really supportive work placements with the kinds of training supports that they really need to be successful. It's a program that we're putting in place in the logistics sector, but there's so much potential for taking this kind of model and moving it much more broadly. Thanks to FSC, we're also able to work with Vancouver Community College, Red River College in Winnipeg, and Nova Scotia Community College. And there's been some talk around kind of how innovation looks different in our communities and how we need to change what we're doing based on our communities. And this has been such a wonderful learning journey for us to look at each of these 3 cities that we're working with and understand how is this going to look in your own community with the barriers that your folks are facing. We all have different priorities in terms of who is not represented in the sector and who needs to be represented in the sector. And so the ability to kind of learn from our partners, learn from their communities, and then bring that back to our own work has been incredibly transformative for us as an institution to look at. You know, we've been doing what works in Hamilton for a number of years, but having the opportunity to reflect on what works in other communities with other populations that are underrepresented is really opening our eyes to what we can continue to do differently and how we can continue to learn from our equity deserving groups who are not as represented in both our own college system and in employment in the sector.
We can see and feel your passion for this. And I think it's a great example of the kind of work that the FSC can support in trying to identify those evidence-based approaches that we can both export and open source. What gives you the confidence that this is different, that this is going to, and these types of approaches will work to change the trajectory?
What gives me, that's a great question. I don't know. And I mean, I think the beauty of FSC and of our project is that we have the opportunity to try things out that we're not 100% sure is going to work, but we have the ability to learn from our communities, to spend the time getting to know the folks who would best benefit from our training, getting to know the employers at the other side of it, and trying things out, you know. We've changed curriculum a number of times, and we've worked really closely with our partners to reflect on programming and say, you know, this will work because of this, but this might not work in our community because we have this specific population who has these specific needs. And having the ability to respond to that in a really nimble and innovative way has been really helpful. And so I don't feel like we need to be 100% confident that everything is going to work in every context, but we have the ability to find ways to make things work and pull the right people together to support our learners in the best possible way.
It's doing exactly what Rashmi and Wendy said. It's iterating the process and innovating the way we do skills development, right?
Exactly.
Rashmi, I'd love to ask the same question. You shared a little bit about the Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst, but in terms of, if we just stick with that example of that chef who goes into the program, what skills, challenges, or issues is the Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst intended to address?
So many. First of all, the key skill that we really are addressing is bridging knowledge into cybersecurity in a really rapid way. So cybersecurity on its own has been mysterious, right? You hear the word cybersecurity, it's sitting somewhere in a corner, it's in this darkness, it's cloaked in mystery. So first we have to strip away the mystery and realize that there's actually pathways into cybersecurity that are rapid. You can actually gain these skills quickly through what Natalie just addressed, micro-credentials, right? The beauty of micro-credentials, so we want to bring people into the industry, validate them quickly. So micro-credentials are a validation into the industry that you have gained specific skills, you have been able to practice. So our first area of challenge for us was obviously looking at how do we bring the right micro-credentials. So we partnered with SANS Institute, the world's leading cybersecurity training company. And that was the beginning, was to look at what were jobs looking for, what were the job requirements, did a scan worldwide, then really focused in on Canada. And that partnership with SANS on the micro-credentials to take somebody from, I have a interest in cybersecurity, a demonstrated interest, a passion, I don't know tech, and in 7 months, we're going to pivot you into a career in cybersecurity. So that was our first, was the rapid workforce development solution into cyber. And the micro-credentials were a big part of that. And then looking at who are we bringing into the program as well. So definitely we wanted to increase representation. That was, and how do we make sure that the individuals that we want reflect the community that we want to see in cyber, right? We want to change the community inside cybersecurity as an industry as a whole throughout the country. So we focused on women, new Canadians, and individuals who are being displaced through technology disruption or underemployed from their skills that we could see. And knowing that each one of these groups have a couple of barriers, and we had to reduce those barriers right away. Economic barriers. So the average seat cost of our training program, are you ready for it, is $30,000. Throughout the sponsorship of our sponsors from RBC, Rogers, that's why we're Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst, Government of Canada, and City of Brampton, we created a scholarship program that covers the full cost of the program. So economic barriers have been reduced. Applicants, they pay a $500 registration fee. So first barrier reduced. The next barrier is creating a sense of community. Our program is 7 months in length, but only 3 weeks of those 7 months are actually live training. During the other parts of it, could be a very lonely journey. So we had to quickly create communities of bringing individuals together and making sure that they could go through this journey as a cohort, as a group of professionals, that they could be supportive. And that's where inclusivity begins, right? Inclusivity of nurturing a sense of problem solving together, inclusivity of helping one another to achieve each other's goals. And that's where I think, there's no competition, it's actually supportive. And that to me is the inclusivity environment that we created. The other part that we looked at was in innovation of programming. We really targeted individuals who are mid-career career changers. And so these individuals have a passion, a desire to change their career trajectory. So the chef going into cyber, or the individual who's been in a survival job as an Uber driver for the past 4 years, supporting his family of 4 as a new immigrant. And being able to bring these individuals into this pivot in their mid-career. Because it's those skills again, right? The lived experiences that bring inclusion, diversity, problem solving into cybersecurity. But I also know that those are the individuals that are going to succeed through a rigorous 7-month program. So we lowered the barriers of entry, but we also had to lower the barriers of being able to invite and create an environment for people to want to see themselves in a 7-month program to change their careers. Because
wonderful,
as an adult, right, I don't want to necessarily change my career right now, but we change our careers often, and we gain skills, but we need to make sure that we are encouraging others to look at themselves and say, I can do this. I can do this while I'm working. I can do this program. So, those are some of the key barriers that we had to quickly work on to reduce. And then the employers on the other side, which Natalie also addressed, where you have to get that employer community on board and to say, there is no previous technical experience, no previous cybersecurity experience, but trust us. The lived experience plus these micro credentials are going to make the best cybersecurity professional that your company's ever hired.
Amazing. 2 great examples. I want to pivot a bit and actually talk about the role of the government and what role the government plays and the business and social sector organizations have in developing innovation and ecosystems that are truly inclusive to all. And Nadine, I want to go to you first. Love to hear your thoughts on this one. And then Wendy, get your thoughts, and then we can open up to the rest of the panel.
And through education is that we can look at work when for education, we can look at working with youth or entrepreneurs from a strength versus a deficit mentality, because when you work from a deficit place, you're thinking about what is wrong. But if we work from a place of strength, we look into the possibility of what is possible and build from that. So I think that's one of the things that we can do. And also, some of the programs above that we've done. So, we have the Basel program which is the Black Entrepreneurship Caribbean Leadership Training Program, which works with 400 Black entrepreneurs from across the country, looking at where they're at and what were the gaps in the skill sets they need to be entrepreneurs. And so when we think of programs like that, when we look at these programs, it could never have been accomplished without government support at all levels. And it's not as if the government woke up one day and said, hey, we have to help these people. It's years of active lobbying at all levels. But this year, finally, such programs as the Black Entrepreneurship Loan Fund, amongst other supports, have been available to us. A moment we've arrived at is the first recognition exactly at the question, what role do government and business sector and the social sector have in developing? But they have a big role in everything we do. A society without its exclusive this support, we're not going to succeed. And so we need to see more of these bright spots to benefit from the supports. I was thinking of one entrepreneur as I heard Rashmi talk about her chef. He developed a program that does sizing. So you stand in front of the mirror and I don't know how it all works, but it measures your body. And when you go into the store, if you're a size 16, it's a perfect size. So imagine, that this level and this kind of innovation, this young Black man needs more of this support, to not just, get the product into stores, but he doesn't have a network. So he came to us at the BBPA because it's one thing that you've developed this great innovation, but who are your supports? So through, Future Skills and our partnership with Ryerson, and Wendy's a dynamic supporter, we're able to get the mentorship and the access to the networks to take his product farther. So I think, businesses and governments have a huge role to play as we support entrepreneurs with their innovative products and ideas.
And such a great example. I mean, of course, we need the funding to get, we need to put, I think to Wendy said, organizations and the government to put their money where their, intentions are. But we also have so many examples where just supportive ideas and support through ecosystems makes such a big difference. Wendy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, I think, a lot of what I would say has already been said, although I might say it in a different way. But I think a couple of things that are really important to recognize. Innovation occurs on the periphery. If you're established and you're doing well the way you're doing, there's very little impetus to change, whether you're a large organization or an individual. And why that's important, just building on what Nadine said, sorry, I've been calling her the wrong name for 1,000 years, is that we need to take an asset-based approach. Because if you look at what the World Economic Forum has said is among the most important skills post-COVID, it's resilience. And adversity often breeds resilience. And we don't have time, but Nini's got a great personal story about this. And it's important to understand that, for example, COVID, we know hit the Black community harder than anyone else. But strangely, the Black community did not experience the same decline in mental health, for example, self-assessments of mental health or optimism that other segments of the population did. And, we could dig into that more deeply, but I would argue refugees, immigrants, people who adversity often are more successful as entrepreneurs because when they get knocked down, they don't, go into the corner and give up. They get and move again. So thinking about resilience as something that different communities bring, I think is hugely important. And then the other critical point is around understanding, and this is so important when we talk about skills. The government has to understand, employers have to understand that it's a supply and a demand issue. So of course we want in skills and job seekers, and we want to help people upskill, reskill, and so on. But we also have to address the fundamental truth that employers are often looking for skills in all the wrong places. Employers often are fishing in very small ponds because they're hiring the way they're relying on their informal networks, they're dealing with the suppliers they've always dealt with, and so on. And government very much the same. So from my point of view, one of the biggest issues that we have to really grapple with is not just helping the job seekers or the entrepreneurs, although we need to do that, but we have to really push hard on those established institutions, financial institutions, governments, employers large and small, to get them to start rethinking their practices through an inclusion lens.
Amazing. I love, Wendy, so many different things to unpack there. I think, unfortunately, we're at our time to take a break, but the last 45, 50 minutes have just flown by. So we'll be taking a quick break, and then we'll be back in to take questions from the audience. So we'll see everyone at 12:50, I believe. All righty, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a nice little stretch or grabbed a coffee or tea. We have excited to continue the conversation, and we have the Menti up of your contributions and ideas on what does inclusive innovation mean and what words come to mind. A lot of these are talked about and discussed in our discussion so far. So the cognitive diversity, the inclusion of other of women and other and so forth and so on. So great to see a lot of the same ideas. We also just want to open it up to Q&A. So please submit your questions for the panel. And we've got one question we're going to kick off with from Santiago. And Santiago asks, how can we create and reinforce the necessary capacities so that Indigenous people and local communities can spearhead this innovation movement? What movement so that we have the necessary means to start without depending on the external organizations, without necessarily having to depend on external organizations and people. So what can local communities and Indigenous people do themselves to spearhead the innovation movement? Who would like to take this first?
I can make a couple of comments. We've done a couple of projects with the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business, and also through the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. Ashley Richard coordinates our work with Indigenous women entrepreneurs in particular. And a few things have come out that are really, I think, important to note. One is, again, back to the stereotypes and the definitions of entrepreneurship and innovation. I have been led to understand that if you ask, an Indigenous person in their community, do you want to be Bill Gates? Do you want to be an entrepreneur? And that's your notion. It tends not to resonate. But if you frame the question around creating value for your community, you get a very different result. Indigenous people actually are more represented as entrepreneurs than other people in Canada, which a lot of people don't know. They export more than the average entrepreneur in Canada. And yet most of the systems really block their access to things like capital. I mean, think about it. Half of the population is on reserve, where traditional notions of land ownership don't apply, which has an impact on credit ratings and financing and their tax issues and so on. So you really need Indigenous-led solutions to support Indigenous entrepreneurs. You really need to, I think some of the procurement efforts have helped channel money in. I think eroding our notions of what it takes to work in tech. We work with an Indigenous-led startup called Jelly Academy, for instance, that can take someone, even without a high school education, and transition them into a well-paid digital job. And now that we can do more things remotely, that provides opportunities. We have to think about infrastructure in Indigenous communities. So think about it. A lot of Indigenous communities don't have running water. They most certainly don't have access to high-speed internet or a lot of the other wraparound services. Those are fundamental investments, I would argue, in innovation and entrepreneurship, not just tied to social justice. So, I think there's stuff that the external world can help address, but a lot of it does have to do with Indigenous-led solutions for Indigenous entrepreneurs.
It just goes to show, Wendy, reflects what Nadine was saying too. Like the Black community is innovating, the Indigenous community is innovating, but maybe not in the frame of reference of how it's been defined in the industry or how people know it or think of it to be. But they are creating that value and creating solving problems in everyday lives with resilience, as you said, and with a different level of breaking down those barriers, even if the systemic support's not there. So imagine what is possible when we actually erode the systemic barriers as well. Go ahead,
even another thing to note, if you think about the Sustainable Development Goals, those are baked in to Indigenous culture in ways they're not baked into mainstream culture. So if you're about the Sustainable Development Goals and the environment and so on, you're more likely to find innovative solutions in Indigenous communities than you are elsewhere.
Amazing. Thank you for that insight and that answer. Another question that we have is, What has the pandemic and the last 18 months changed when it comes to creating inclusive innovation? What has changed in the environment in this work? What has the pandemic exposed? We've talked a little bit about that, but I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on that question. Who'd like to jump in first?
I can jump in first. I think it's hard to say what the pandemic hasn't changed for us. And I think it's been for us as an institution a time for reflection on how we deliver programming. City School by Mohawk, our kind of key tenet is that we embed our programming within community spaces that folks are already accessing. And this has been a couple of years where folks are not accessing anything, and we are moving to remote, and that's been a huge change. And we have learners who are, who have had some significant skills gaps exposed because of the pandemic. And so going back on our programming and reflecting on what else do we need to provide people to make sure that they're able to be successful, not only like within our own systems, but beyond our systems as well, has been huge. We proposed our program in material handling before the pandemic happened, and it just happened that this was the sector that really, there was a huge spotlight on logistics and material handling in both a positive way, in that there are tons of jobs, and also a really negative way, and a lot of negative publicity around these types of jobs. And so it has really led us to working with our employers on making sure that we are able to put forward appropriate jobs for our learners, and make sure that we're supporting folks into sustainable, healthy job positions, and really learning what our local employers in this sector are doing and changing. And I think if the pandemic hadn't happened, we would have kind of gone on as usual and had some great successes, but there's so much more that we have learned because of what the pandemic has exposed, both from the employment side of things and from the how do we support our learners in this changing environment when their own lives are changing all the time as well.
Thank you for that, Natalie. Anyone else like to jump in? Nadine? Oh, Nadine, we can't hear you.
Muted.
Sorry, désolé. It also changed, wellness and how we think about our mental health and that quote unquote work-life balance. What we recognize with a lot of our members is that now you're home and you're working maybe more than you normally do. And so, what does it look like to take care of ourselves as we are, building and working and innovating? And then also people thinking about how do we take care of our people in this new environment as we are, working through screens like this. I mean, I haven't seen so many people in such a long time. And in different industries, a lot of what our entrepreneurs are saying is that my business is a people-focused business. I need to see people. And so it's coming up with different strategies of connecting with people through this virtual environment, while still, driving your innovation and driving your business growth and all of that. So I think that's some of the things that has, COVID has come out of this environment.
Absolutely. All right, go ahead, Rashmi, please. What's changed
I was just going to add
to
that. It was for us, it's around agility. We had to learn agility of adapting our programming. We were already a hybrid program, but for us, it was moving to a virtual platform within the first month of our program launching, and having to learn how to build communities and how to build communication skills in a virtual world. And for us to now see, COVID brought hyper cyber activity and put cybersecurity on the front page of the newspaper, on headline news, every time you turn on the news about hackers. And so now we're starting to learn how to teach our learners about the hyper connection that they need to keep, and how they need to really ensure that they're communicating effectively. And there's passive communication that happens when you're in a team side by side, but with COVID and virtual communication, we've had to really up the game on the communication skills within cybersecurity professionals across the world, because those are the skills that allow for people to constantly be in contact, talk through a problem, talk through what they're seeing, talk through actions and escalation points and resolution. So we've seen an impact on new skills needing to be developed but deepened as well. So those are some of the impacts that we're reflecting upon, and how do we reflect that back into our program and make it meaningful for our learners as they graduate and go off into employment.
Rashmi, that's such a, I think, an important reflection. And one of the things that we at Walmart Canada also, spend a lot of time, which is those power skills of the future, right? The present and the future, whether it's, interpersonal communication, or it's mindsets, right? And growth mindset, or it's the resilience and the well-being, Nadine, that you talked about, that across function, it's a industry agnostic, function agnostic, power skills that are going to be required for individuals to be successful in whatever ventures or careers that they go after. And this is an area that I think the pandemic has definitely shown a light on, so that we all need to continue to develop within our organizations. We're coming to the end of our time together, and I was teasing at the break that I was been stuck between just wanting to vigorously take notes of everything that's being said and trying to moderate. With your final, just ask you guys to share your why. Why have you dedicated your time, career, energy, talent to this question, to solving inclusive innovation? And what are one or two resources that you can leave the audience with? So I'd love to hear from everybody your why, and one or two resources we can leave the audience with. Wendy, I started with you last of the first question, so I'm going to start with you now.
Well, I mean, I guess I was a woman in tech, but probably even more than that, I'm the child of a refugee who had the typical experience in terms of not having opportunities associated with his education, and it did not end well. I've seen the impact on mental and physical health of being excluded from employment opportunities. And so for me, it's not really theoretical, it's real. And I think that's, I'm also very aware of certain aspects of my privilege, but also that privilege is more than skin color. Privilege is also socioeconomic status. It's, did you have parents who both spoke English and could help you with your homework? Did you know what an engineer was when you were making career decisions? So all of those things for me have really shaped the way that I look at issues around entrepreneurship and innovation. And at the same time, I believe to the core of my being that there is a business case for this. This is about not just social justice, but about economic prosperity, success as a nation.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for that, and for sharing your personal why and motivation. Nadine, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Am I unmuted now? Am I unmuted?
You are. Oh, no, I think you just muted yourself, Nadine. Nadine. Oh, I think you just.
Oh my gosh.
Now you're good.
I do this every day, but it's not easy. So where I'm sitting in my fabulous condo overlooking Flemington Park. Flemington Park is, I remembered when I came to Canada, I became an entrepreneur from the age of 12. When I was 17, I took a co-op course, and this woman who was an entrepreneur, I didn't know what the word was, came into the class, and she said, and she looked fabulous. She was wearing a fur coat. She was well coiffed and well put together. And she said, you too can have this and be this fabulous. And you know how? You have a business and you get an education and you structure that business. And I wanted that. But that little girl, 17 in Flemington Park, saw Gail Freelander, an entrepreneur, and she approached me not from a deficit perspective, but from a strength perspective. And so that's my why. I believe in entrepreneurship because I was an entrepreneur at the age of 12, and and this woman inspired me from the age of 16. And she came from a perspective of just complete inclusiveness. And so that's my why. I think if we look at people from an inclusive perspective and say, yes, you, Nadine, it's possible. It's possible for you, Rashmi. Then, and we build on that, then we will have achieved. And so that's my why.
That is amazing. I love that story. You are that fabulous, and you're that fabulous for so many other people. Thank you for sharing that. Natalie.
Thanks. Yeah, I think my why is a couple of things. One, a consciousness of my own privilege and the importance that access to education has had in my life, and the fact that was never a question in my life, that I could access quality education and that could help me better my life. And also a real passion for my community. And I care a lot about Hamilton, and I care a lot about what we can do to support our community members, and the role that education plays in that. And so being able to be a part of an institution that's recognizing our role in the economic prosperity of our community, and in elevating and supporting and celebrating the folks in our community who traditionally don't access our services, has been really wonderful. And I think the opportunity to bring this across Canada and to work with other folks who care just as much about their institutions doing the right things for their community members has been one of the coolest things I've been able to do in my career.
Amazing. It's what Wendy talked about, value creation for your community being a driver of your purpose. So beautiful.
Something amazing that happens when you bring women together and you share so openly and with vulnerability. I literally have goosebumps listening to everybody. My why comes from a deep need to create employment pathways for individuals. And this has been with me for my entire career journey in tech ed, as an entrepreneur in tech ed, and now loving Ryerson for being so disruptive and allowing for me to create a vision for new disruption in education and career pathways. It comes from watching my parents, I was a new immigrant, and watching their struggles and seeing their accomplishments, and knowing that pathways to employment is what lifts the individual and lifts their families, which then lifts our communities, which lifts our country. And it's that inclusivity part that becomes our national competitive edge. And I'm so wanting Canada to get there right nationally. I want my daughters to feel proud about a national innovation strategy that includes them, and that they're not just having a seat at the table. They have the privilege to create their own table and pull up a seat to it. And so my why comes from watching individuals lifted every single day coming out of each one of your programs and lifting their communities.
Amazing, Rashmi. And I think, again, I could speak for everyone feeling those goosebumps and being inspired. Well, that brings us to the close of our session. Again, I want to thank the Canadian Science Policy Conference for putting this important topic on the agenda, the Future Skills Center, and all of our project partners representing those projects joining us for this really important conversation. Thank everyone for joining this discussion. And just so you know, you can continue to engage in this important topic with the FSC. There's an upcoming Future Skills Summit in February. There's a call for expression of interest for research on quality of work. There's the FSC Innovation Research, so much content, best practices, evidence-based approaches to this solving this problem of inclusive innovation that are shared in FSC's newsletters and social media channels. So make sure that if you aren't following the FSC and all of these amazing bodies, that you start to do so. Links to those resources will be put in the chat. And thank you everyone for your time and attention. And again, a beautiful thank you to our panelists for your insights and your knowledge and your expertise and your passion on this topic. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bila, for being a great moderator. Thank you.